Scott Syverson, and welcome back to another video on paradaptive intelligence. Before we start in with today's topic, I want to ask you one question and see if you can answer this. Do you know what biologically triggers excitement? We've all seen it. We see it all the time in sales. But do you know what actually triggers it? What is the biological trigger and biological function of excitement? I'll bet that most of you don't know what that biological trigger is, and if any, very few. But by the end of this video, you'll have an idea of what that biological trigger is. As mentioned in previous videos, there are two ways to solve a problem, what I call pain points. The mind motivates people to solve problems by giving it a small level of pain, or sometimes even higher levels of pain, to fix something that isn't right, that they feel isn't right. This is the adaptation process. The two ways that you can solve a problem is yourself. You go out and you do whatever it is and solve whatever the problem is, make it better. The other way is if you don't have the skills, time, money, resources, physical aptitude, whatever it may be, to solve that problem, you use relationships to solve that problem. A relationship is a salesman going to a store, going and getting a solution from somebody else. And there is always two elements in every transaction. There is the something, whether it be an item or a service, and a someone. So a transaction is between people. So there are always two algorithms in process during every transaction, the someone and the something. And in today's video, what we're going to focus on almost exclusively is the something. How does the brain process whether or not the service or the item is going to solve the problem that they need to make go away? In order to do this, we're going to have to look at what I have dubbed emotional tonal algorithms. These are very specific sequences of emotions that occur in a very specific order and have to be satisfied in a very specific way. Each one of these emotions is a comparative engine. It evaluates one specific aspect of the transition. It compares it to known variables in the past to what's being presented to it in the moment. And this is one of the biggest things I want you to take away from it. You must satisfy these emotions in sequence. You cannot skip ahead and try and solve that and try and come back. That will reproduce callbacks. They must be satisfied in sequence. The brain machinery cannot do it any other way. Sales eagles, the top 5% of sales, and no matter what industry you want to look at, after studying their methodology, what I have found is that they follow this sequence and do not vary it from it. So if you want to move yourself in that top 5%, what you need to learn is to work within the brain's organization and these emotional algorithms and in the specific sequence to produce the greatest results in the fastest order, which is what the top 5% do. To date, we have identified 10 algorithms. There's one that has to do with adaptation. The other 9 emotions deal with relationships. Relationships will be the subject of the next video. They use the same exact machinery, but they have different algorithms to produce different results to create relationships. The human action cycle works in conjunction with these emotional algorithms. They two are intertwined. There are different mechanisms, but they work with each other. And it is primarily because the human action cycle is involved why these have to be solved in sequence. This mechanism can only move down the line one emotion at a time. It is not capable, biologically capable, of jumping ahead to other emotions. It has to satisfy things in sequence or it stops the process, meaning no sale to you as a salesperson. The emotional algorithm that we're going to look at right now is called the Adaptation Emotional Tonal Algorithm. As noted in previous videos, and we teased this at the end of the last video, this is probably one of the single most important things that you're ever going to see in your sales professional career. Starting at acceptance in the middle and working to the right, what you'll see is a series of emotions in 2 lines. The first upper line is called the vetting process. The line below and to the right is called the application process. In the vetting process, what it does is it theoretically goes through and examines a solution. In the application process, what it does is takes the solution that was selected and actually puts it into work in the real world. So one's theoretical, one's the real life application of the solution. These emotions, all 8 of them, have to be transversed in every transaction. There's no getting around it. You can't skip one. All 8 of these will be present, and again, you have to know what they are and the sequence they are in so that you can service them within the brain's architecture and not introduce clutter, confusion, or chaos in that process with your sales presentation. With each emotion that is satisfied in this sequence, you'll receive greater and greater doses of joy that you're receiving internally. There's an old sales adage that says, customers want to be sold. Well, that's not really what's been happening here biologically. What has happened is they're programmed to seek greater and greater doses of joy. And that means satisfying emotions leading to the resolution of a problem or a pain point. We've seen the problem, but we just mislabeled it by saying they want to be sold. No, they're biologically programmed to receive joy for solving problems. And that's what we were observing. All right, let's take a look at the emotions of the innovation sales cycle. Starting with emotion number 1 in the sequence is acceptance, which is going to be in the middle of the graph here. What acceptance is, the emotion of acceptance, it defines what the problem is, what the pain point is, what are they trying to solve, what do they accept as their problem. You may come in and look at it as a salesman and see a problem, but that has nothing to do with the way they're defining it. You do not know what other aspects they may be trying to incorporate or satisfy within their organization or business. So the most important thing that you can do before you ever start to try and pitch any product or solution is to understand thoroughly what it is they're trying to solve and the various aspects and points of that problem as they accept it, not as you see it, but as they accept it. Because as you learn, everything else in the rest of this sequence all pivots around how they perceive the problem and the aspects of the problem that need to be solved. The next emotion in the sequence is learning anticipation. There really was no term in the English language for this emotion. It was something that had to be invented as the science was being researched for this particular model. So the intent of this emotion is to try and pull pieces from whatever you know that might help solve this problem. It is exclusive of whether or not you can solve the problem yourself or not. But what it wants to do is identify what are the elements of the solution, or what will the solution have to contain in order to solve the pain point as it understands it, as it has defined the problem. This is probably the single biggest complaint that I hear from salespeople, in that people are coming in and shopping and not really wanting to buy, but they're just there to gather information about solving a particular pain point that they want, whether it be pursuit of pleasure or whether it would be pursuit of fixing a pain point. What you need to understand, what you have to understand as a salesperson, that people are biologically programmed to investigate solutions. So rather than complain about this, you need to learn to make this your friend. And you do that by being the person that explains what the industry is doing, what your competitors are doing, the strengths and weaknesses of their products, and the strengths and weaknesses of your own products and where you're going. And in that way, you become the expert and the go-to person whose advice they're going to seek in the future, as well as for the problem that's in front of them. Again, whether it's pursuit of pleasure or whether it's pursuit of solving a pain point within their brain, something that's not right in their universe or business. Learn to make it your friend. Explain everything that you can to them. In the next video, you'll learn how this helps develop relationships and the particular emotions that have to be satisfied in relationships and how that benefits you in the long run. The next emotion that we need to discuss in the sequence is confidence. What confidence does is rates the features of possible solutions that you have developed in learning anticipation. It's going to go through all the options that you've learned in learning anticipation. And it will rate which one of those is going to best satisfy the problem at hand. And again, this evaluation will be based on their acceptance, what they accept to be the problem. So again, you see why acceptance is the most important. Confidence is going to hinge on everything, as well as learning anticipation hinges everything on how they perceive the problem, not as you perceive it as a salesperson. You may be able to educate them and fill out their concept in the motivation stage of acceptance, but again, what they end up with in their brain as what they define it is going to drive learning anticipation and confidence. The next emotion, and the answer to the quiz at the beginning of the video, is excitement. What does excitement evaluate? Excitement biologically evaluates whether or not they have the resources to execute what confidence has selected. This can be time, physical ability, space, money, skills. There may be others, but those are primarily the scope of what it's going to be resolving for. Once they evaluate that they have the resources to obtain the solution that you're going to give them, they will have satisfied excitement, and you'll see it on them. So when you see excitement, and we've all seen it, we know what it looks like, stop selling. Internally, that customer has already identified they have the resources to obtain what it is that you're offering by way of solution that they want. And again, that becomes vitally important when you start talking about price. The last emotion in the vetting process is courage. Courage examines risk. The types of risks that it can be examining, resource overruns, collateral damage by implementing the solution, other things that may be knocked off kilter, a better product, a better deal on the same product elsewhere. These are the types of risks, as well as a solution that fails to actually work or be implemented. This is where guarantees, warranties, refunds, product support, etc. come in. These are risk mitigators. These are things that help reduce the level of risk. When courage is satisfied, they sign the check, and not until then. So if you've been pressuring or asking for a sale up to this point, you've been wasting your time. They're not going to write you a check until they have courage. This is the last emotion in the vetting phase, and again, that signals the desire to actually implement it, which is why they're going to write you a check, pay you cash, or start the process with a PO order to get this solution that you're offering in their hands and in their business. At this point, I want to address one thing in sales that is the bane of every salesperson, which is callbacks. Now, if you've been working diligently and working within the brain's process, going through the emotions of acceptance, learning anticipation, confidence, excitement, and courage, you're going to have a high probability of producing a sale very quickly if your product can satisfy and meet the confidence of solving the problems as they perceive them. What most people do is they skip ahead in the process, start talking about this, that, or the other thing before someone has actually satisfied the emotion in the sequence where they're currently processing. This is the source of almost all callbacks. Now, it may occur that they think of something after the sales cycle, and that's always going to occur. But primarily, the prime reason of callbacks is that you are not following the sequence. And your biggest friend in this process, if you remember, we talked about the adapter and its biases. The adapter runs the human action cycle, which is moving down the line and solving these emotions. Its bias is cooperation. So now that you know what the specific emotions are, you need to ask specific questions about the emotions. You're guaranteed to get a response because biologically they're programmed to cooperate and tell you about this. So as you're moving through the sales process, if you're not sure they've reached confidence yet, ask them, Are you confident that this product or service is going to do exactly what you need to do? There's other ways you can ask it. Is it something that it needs to do or isn't doing, or that you wanted it to do? There's a lot of ways that you can answer this question, but you do need to answer it if you're not sure before you move on to excitement. And the same with excitement, and the same with courage. And in fact, asking these questions will prompt them to really evaluate if they are satisfied, if they are excited, and if they have the courage to move forward. One of the biggest mistakes that I see among salespeople, and I was guilty of it myself when I was earlier in my career, is that you come up with some promotion or sale and you come in waving it and shouting about it and talking it up right off the bat. That is probably the biggest mistake that you can make, again, because we've already identified these emotions get satisfied in a very specific sequence. It's not going to be satisfied because you have a promotion. You might have talked to the customer about that product earlier on and have a good understanding with it. But what you don't know is what are their current pressures. They might be pressures that have occurred since you last were there that they now have to solve, which is why it's vitally important to go through all the emotional steps. You can't skip them. So do yourself a favor. Don't come in and talk about those promotions. And oh, by the way, what are promotions? How do they fit into this? Promotions are risk mitigators. By adding value to the product, you reduce the risk of if it goes bad or if it doesn't go as planned. There was added value to compensate for the loss. So whether it be on sale, which is a price issue, which is going to be excitement, or if it's a promotion and promotions are risk mitigators, you need to understand where those fit in. All right, now it's time to talk about the application phase. Application phase is after they've written you the check and the product arrives. The first emotion is faith. Faith is about the implementation of whatever product or service that you have provided for them. They're going to compare the actual costs versus the ones they anticipated or estimated. And it's going to compare those, the real to the estimated, to come up with the value of joy of whether or not this product meets the expectations. And this is why it is vitally important that you manage this aspect during the vetting phase in the sales process. These people have to have an idea of what that implementation looks like in order to have a proper estimate of what it's going to cost and put it in. The reason why faith starts on the second half of the line is faith is a very, very strong emotion. You think about this biologically. You've acquired something, you've put out resources, now you're putting out even more resources and time and information and whatever physical space or whatever else it may be to implement this solution. So you're putting out resources without seeing any benefit at this point. That is why it takes such a high dose of internal joy to be implementing a solution in faith. Again, keep that in mind as you're going through the sales process, because if you haven't set the proper expectations, their alignment of proper expectations versus actuality is going to differ greatly and produce a negative result for you, possibly leading to the cancellation of the sale. The next emotion in the application phase is exuberance. This occurs as the expected results start to occur. As they start to see what they anticipated to solve their problems occurs, they start receiving internal shots of joy, which we call exuberance. The more points of satisfaction that you get in this aspect or at this point in the application of your product, the more exuberance the customer is going to receive in an internal reward. And remember, our friend, the mirror neuron system, is also going to be putting that on the outside for you to see what's going on with them. The final emotion is what I call satisfied customer. In the model itself, we don't call this particular phase satisfied customer, but I've modified it slightly just so it's more business friendly for you to understand. What the satisfied customer phase is, and this is the one thing that I want you to take away from this particular emotion, this is the final point of how it remembers the product and the sales process. Satisfied customer is comprised of the amount of joy that they received in the implementation process under faith and the amount of joy they received in the exuberance process, combines those two together to give you a final score. And this is what goes into memory. And this is why it is vitally important for you to manage these aspects of post-sale and not leave it to chance. This is how you're going to be remembered, is the joy that is accumulated in these two final processes. Most salespeople forget faith and exuberance. They've got the check, they've accomplished their mission, which was to get a sale. But if you do not manage both those expectations early on in the sales process, again, it will most likely lead to a cancellation of the sale. So if you want to keep it on the books, you have to manage for the satisfied customer final scorecard. It's the only way to keep the sales on the books. All right, I want to leave you with two thoughts before we conclude today's video. Before moving on in a presentation, ask, are they confident? Are they excited? Are the risks acceptable? Make sure you have those things in place before you go on and try and move to the next emotion. Again, remember, the adapter and its cooperation bias is your friend. Use it to ask targeted questions about the specific emotions that their brain is DNA programmed to solve in the specific sequence that they're programmed to solve them. Follow this process. Do not skip ahead. Do not jump from confidence to get to courage without satisfying courage first and then excitement that they have the resources. And again, as I've mentioned, excitement is your friend. Once you see it, stop negotiating, stop selling. You know that you've got this sale very close to the bag if the risks are acceptable. For the last thing that we're going to do in this video, I'm going to show you the process with the human action cycle in play. You'll be seeing on the screen a graphic that shows the emotions and how the human action cycle is moving through and trying to satisfy each one of those emotions with the feedback cycle. So you can see it will cycle through. This is nothing more unusual that you're in the middle of a presentation and you see you're not connecting with them and you decide to take a different track. That's the human action cycle at work in your brain. It's going to decide you need to make a correction. Imagination kicks in. Maybe you had other lists of things that you wanted to try. You move down the list to the next item and try that item and see if that gains traction. But that's your human action cycle available. And as you see, that human action cycle moves down the line in order of those emotions. This is why you cannot skip. If you skip ahead, what you will do is you'll force the brain into the other mode. The brain has only two modes. It's either learning or it's solving problems. So if you're not helping the brain solve a problem, you force it into learning mode. And learning mode does not write checks. Learning mode will listen to you, it'll put it into memory, it'll go, gee, that's swell, that's great, but it really isn't going to help me figure out what I need to know right now is this going to work for me? Can I afford this? What are the risks? Whatever it may be. And as you can see by this graphic, there's a whole lot more going on here. And as I've stated before, this is just the briefest of introductions to show you what you need to know in order to be a master of sales. If you want to be in the top 5% in sales, no matter where you go in your industry, no matter what company you move to, you need to master this information and thus master the profession of sales. So you do need to buy my book, Sales Psychology 101, Paradaptive Intelligence, the Grand Unifying Theory of Adaptation, Consumer Behavior, and Sales. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.